Tom had always loved the quiet. He had moved to this little cabin on the edge of the forest to escape the noise of the world. The small town nearby was nothing more than a few houses, a gas station, and a diner that barely ever saw any customers. For years, Tom had lived alone in the cabin, waking up to the chirping of birds and the rustling of leaves. It was peaceful, and that was how he liked it. But tonight was different. The usual stillness of the night was broken by a sound. At first, Tom thought it was just his imagination, a trick of the wind, maybe, but then it came again louder this time. A deep, mournful howl, echoing through the trees. The sound sent a shiver down his spine. It wasn't the usual cries of coyotes or wolves. It was something ... else. Tom sat up in bed, his heart racing. He glanced at the clock. It was nearly midnight. The howl came again, closer this time. It was hard to ignore. It wasn't just a sound. There was something about it that felt ... personal. It was as if it was meant for him. The howling continued, cutting through the night. Each cry more desperate than the last. Tom pulled on his boots and stepped outside onto the porch, squinting into the darkness. The moon was full, casting an eerie light over the woods. The trees stood tall and silent, their shadows stretching across the ground like dark fingers. But there in the distance, he saw a shape, just a flicker, something moving. Was it an animal or something else? His mind raced with possibilities. He wasn't used to hearing anything like this out here. The forest was quiet at night, peaceful, but this howlet was unlike anything he had ever heard before. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, something watching him. The wind shifted, and the howl came again, closer now. Tom took a deep breath and decided to go look. He wasn't one to jump at shadows, but this felt different. There was something wrong about it. With his flashlight in hand, Tom ventured into the woods. The night air was cool against his skin, and the ground beneath his boots was soft, almost like the earth itself was alive. Every step seemed to echo louder than it should, and the trees above swayed in the breeze, casting long, twisting shadows. He walked for what felt like an hour, the howls fading into the distance. But no matter how far he went, he couldn't shake the sense that something was out there, just beyond his reach. The howling stopped as suddenly as it had started, leaving only the rustling of the wind and the chirping of crickets. Tom paused, listening intently. The air was thick with the silence that followed. It was almost worse than the howls, this deep, heavy quiet that seemed to press in on him from all sides. He turned back toward the cabin, relieved that the sound had stopped. But as he began walking, he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone. Something was following him, moving just out of sight in the darkness. His pace quickened. His heart began to race again. He reached the edge of the woods, breathing a little heavier than usual. The porch light of his cabin glowed faintly. In the distance, a beacon of safety. But when he stepped onto the porch, he stopped dead in his tracks. There, lying at the foot of the door, was a deer. It was large, its fur dark and matted, its eyes wide and lifeless. But it wasn't just any deer. The marks on its body, deep, jagged slashes, were unlike anything Tom had ever seen. It looked like the work of something much stronger than a normal predator. A chill ran down his spine as he crouched down to examine the animal. The deer's body was warm, as if it had only just been killed. But there was no blood around it. No signs of struggle, no drag marks in the dirt. It had just appeared. Tom couldn't understand. He glanced around, searching the woods for any sign of what had happened. But all was still. The only sound was the soft rustling of the leaves, and even that seemed to be muffled. He backed away slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. This wasn't just some animal attack. There was something about this that didn't make sense. He looked at the dead deer and then back at the dark woods. The howls had stopped, but in their place, an eerie silence hung over the cabin. And in that silence, Tom couldn't help but feel a growing unease. Whatever had caused the howls, whatever, had left the marks on the deer. It wasn't done yet. Tom stood there for a long time, just staring at the lifeless animal in front of him. He didn't know what to do. Should he stay inside? Should he leave? Was he being watched? The wind picked up again, carrying with it the faintest trace of a familiar sound. The howl. But this time, it was far away, almost like it was calling him. Tom hesitated, his mind spinning with thoughts. What was out there? What did it want? But just as quickly as the sound came, it was gone. The silence returned, and for a moment, Tom wondered if he had imagined it all. Maybe it was just an animal. Maybe it was just the wind. But deep down, he knew it was. The question lingered in the air, what had just happened? And more importantly, what was about to happen next? Tom couldn't sleep that night. The events of the evening kept running through his mind over and over again. The howls in the woods, the dead deer left at his doorstep, it didn't make sense. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the deep, jagged marks on the deer's body. They weren't from any ordinary predator. Whatever had killed it, whatever had left it there, was powerful. Something not of this world, the silence that followed the howls, felt even more unsettling. Tom had spent enough time in the woods to know that the night was rarely this still. The wind, which usually carried the sound of rustling leaves or the distant call of an owl, was dead. The air felt thick, heavy, like it was waiting for something. Tom tossed and turned in his bed, but sleep wouldn't come. He could hear every little noise, the creaking of the house, the soft rustling of the trees outside. He finally gave up trying to sleep and got up. The cabin was too quiet, too empty. He needed to know what was going on, what had happened out. There he pulled on his boots, grabbed a flashlight, and stepped out onto the porch. The night air hit him, cold and fresh, as he looked out into the woods. His cabin sat on the edge of the forest, and the trees seemed to stretch on forever. The moonlight made everything look like a dream, soft and silver. But there was no denying the unease that settled in his chest. Tom felt the pull to go back into the woods. Something told him that if he didn't find out what had happened, it would only get worse. But he also felt a deep fear. The howls from the night before had been like a warning. Whatever had made them was out there, waiting. He tried to shake off his fear, telling himself it was just his imagination. Maybe the deer had been killed by a bear or a mountain lion. Maybe it had been dragged there by a hunter. But something in his gut told him it wasn't that simple. Taking a deep breath, Tom stepped off the porch and headed into the woods, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. The trees were tall and dense, their branches creaking as the wind picked up again. But it wasn't the wind that made him jump. It was the feeling of being watched. Every so often, he'd stop and listen. But all he could hear were his own footsteps and the rustling of leaves beneath his feet. Yet the feeling didn't go away. It grew stronger with each step. Someone or something was out there. He walked deeper into the forest, the flashlight beam bouncing off the trunks of the trees. The path was familiar. He had walked these woods countless times before, but tonight, everything felt different. The air was colder, and the shadows seemed longer. Couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking just out of sight, watching him. Then he heard it again, a rustling in the underbrush. Tom froze, his heart pounding. He slowly turned, shining his flashlight in the direction of the sound. The beam swept over the trees and the ground, but nothing was there. Just an animal, he muttered to himself, trying to calm his nerves, but he didn't believe it. There was no reason for him to feel so uneasy. The woods were his home. He had spent years out here, and nothing had ever felt like this. He continued walking, the feeling of being followed never leaving him. After a while, the trees began to thin, and Tom found himself standing in a small clearing. Bathed the area in a ghostly glow, and for a moment he felt a strange sense of peace. But it didn't last long. He heard it again, the howl. But this time, it wasn't distant. It was close, much closer than he expected.
Mouse.
Pulse quickened. He stood still, listening to the sound as it echoed through the trees. It wasn't a normal howl. There was something strange about it, almost human. It wasn't just a call of an animal. It was like a voice calling out to him. His breath caught in his throat as he scanned the clearing. The flashlight flickered for a moment, and then he saw two figures standing just beyond the trees. A woman, at least. She looked like a woman. But there was something wild about her, something untamed. Her hair was dark, tangled, and her clothes were made of furs. She stood tall, her eyes glowing in the dim light. For a moment, Tom couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. Who was this woman? What was she doing in the woods? She didn't move. She didn't speak. She just stood there, watching him, and then as quickly as she had appeared, she vanished into the trees, disappearing without a trace. Tom stood frozen in place. His mind raced to make sense of what he had just seen. Who was she? Why was she out here in the middle of the woods, alone? Before he could collect his thoughts, the howling began again, but this time it wasn't a single howl. It was a carroza. Deep, mournful cry that echoed through the forest, sending chills down his spine. The sound seemed to wrap around him, closing in on him from every direction. Tom spun around, searching for any sign of where the howls were coming from. But there was nothing. No movement, no sign of the strange woman. Just the haunting cries of something unseen. His mind raced, trying to make sense of everything. He had heard legends from the townsfolk about strange creatures that lived in the forest, beings that could change their form. Creatures tied to the land, protectors of the woods. But Tom had always dismissed those stories as just that, stories. Now he wasn't so sure. The howls faded into the distance, and the woods grew quiet once again. But the air felt heavy, charged with something he couldn't explain. He had to know more. He had to find out what was happening. With one last look at the dark trees, Tom turned and headed back to the cabin, his thoughts swirling. He had seen something tonight, something that was far beyond anything he had ever imagined. Whatever was out there, it wasn't just an animal. It was something else. Something ancient. And Tom knew that whatever it wasn't done with him yet. The next morning, Tom woke up late. He hadn't slept well the night before, but when he opened his eyes, the first light of dawn was shining through the windows. It should have been a peaceful morning, but the events from the night before still lingered in his mind. The howling, the strange woman in the woods, it all seemed too real. But then, in the cold light of day, it felt like a dream. Something his mind had created in the darkness. He made his way to the kitchen and began brewing coffee, trying to shake the strange feeling that wouldn't leave him. He opened the door, planning to step outside for some fresh air. But when he looked down, his heart skipped a beat. There, lying at his doorstep, was the same deer from last night. But this time it wasn't just lying. It was fresh, as if it had only just been placed there. Its body was warm, and its eyes were wide open. Tom froze. The marks on the deer were the same as before, deep slashes that looked like they had been made by claws, not teeth. He stepped closer, his heart pounding. The deer was far too large to be an animal like a wolf. The wounds were too clean, too precise. This wasn't the work of a predator. It was something else. Something stronger. Tom bent down and examined the animal. The fur was thick and glossy, but it seemed off, almost unnatural. The marks on its body were not just from a predator. It looked like something had ripped into it with powerful force. Didn't make sense. What could do this to an animal? He reached out to touch the deer, but as his fingers brushed against the fur, a sound echoed through the forest. It was distant, but clear, the howl. It was back, and this time it was louder than before. Tom's breath caught in his throat. He didn't know if it was the same howl he had heard the night before, but it sounded like it was calling to him just as it had before. He quickly stood up and looked around, his eyes scanning the woods, but there was nothing to see.
Hi.
The trees stood silent, the only sound the rustling of the leaves in the wind. Yet Tom felt the weight of the forest pressing in on him, like it was waiting for something. He turned his attention back to the deer. The strange sense of dread washed over him again. Something was wrong, and he knew it. It was as if the forest itself was trying to send him a message, but he couldn't understand what it was. Without thinking, he grabbed a shovel from the shed and dug a small hole near the porch. He wasn't sure what to do with the deer, bury it, leave it there, or something else. The only thing he knew for sure was that he needed to get rid of it. The longer it stayed there, the more he felt like something was watching him, waiting. As he buried the deer, the howl echoed again. But this time, it was closer. Tom stopped digging and looked around. He couldn't see anything, but the sound sent a chill down his spine. It was almost like the howl was telling him to leave, to go. Back inside? But he wasn't sure if it was a warning or just his imagination. When the grave was finished, Tom covered the deer with dirt and stood there for a moment, staring at the spot where it had been. He took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. There was no way he could stay in this cabin forever. Constantly worried about the sounds in the woods and the strange woman who had appeared. He needed answers, and he was going to find them. Tom decided to go into town. Maybe someone there could help him understand what was happening. He grabbed his jacket and left the cabin, locking the door behind him as he walked to his truck. The forest seemed to watch him, the trees standing tall like silent sentinels. The drive into town was uneventful. It was a small, quiet place with a few shops and a diner. Tom had lived here for years but didn't know many people. Most of the townsfolk were older, and they didn't speak much to outsiders. He parked his truck outside the diner and stepped inside. The bell above the door rang as he entered, and the smell of coffee and bacon hit him immediately. There were only a few people inside, just a couple of old men sitting at the counter, drinking coffee and talking in low voices. They didn't pay much attention to Tom as he walked to the counter and sat down on a stool. The waitress, middle-aged woman with short gray hair, smiled at him as she poured a cup of coffee. "What can I get you, hun?" she asked. Tom paused, unsure of how to ask what he needed to know. The howls, the woman in the woods, the dead deer, it all felt like something out of a dream. There had to be someone here who knew something. "Have you ever heard anything strange in the woods around here?" Tom asked quietly, taking a sip of his coffee. The waitress raised an eyebrow, but didn't seem surprised. She looked at the two old men at the counter, then back at Tom. "What do you mean by strange?" she asked, lowering her voice. Tom leaned in. Howls. Noises in the night. Something ... different. The waitress studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then, after a long pause, she spoke. "You're not the first to ask about it," she said quietly. "Some of the old-timers around here talk about things in the woods, things that don't belong. There's talk of protectors, guardians of the land, but no one ever talks about it much. People don't like to think about it. Guardians." Tom repeated, "What do you mean?" She shook her head as if she didn't want to say more, but Tom could tell she knew something. "It's not for me to say," she replied. "But if you're hearing howls at night, you'd best be careful. Some things in these woods don't like being disturbed." Tom felt a chill run down his spine. The strange woman in the woods, the howls, the deer, it was all connected. But how? As he left the diner, Tom's mind raced. The woman in the woods. The stories of guardians it all pointed to something ancient, something deep in the forest. And he had a feeling that the answers were out there, waiting for him. But he wasn't sure if he was ready to face what he might find. The more Tom thought about what the waitress had said, the more the unease gnawed at him. Guardians. Protectors of the land. It all seemed like something out of an old myth, a story told to scare children. But the events of the past few days had been too real, too strange to ignore. The howls, the dead deer, the mysterious woman in the woods, it was clear something was going on. And Tom couldn't shake the feeling that it was tied to the forest itself. He couldn't let it go. Whatever had happened, whatever was out there, it wasn't just some animal. It was something more. And Tom knew he had to find out what that something was. That evening, after dinner, he put on his boots, grabbed his flashlight, and headed back into the woods. The light from the setting sun cast long shadows across the land, but Tom wasn't afraid of the dark. It was the silence that bothered him more. It was as if the forest had fallen into a deep, unnatural quiet, and it made his skin crawl. He walked. Deeper into the woods, the path familiar, but now strangely unsettling. His heart thudded in his chest with every step, but he couldn't stop. The stories the waitress had shared echoed in his mind, but he had to see for himself. He had to know the truth. The further he went, the denser the trees became. The underbrush grew thicker, making each step more difficult. The woods felt alive, the trees towering above him, their branches twisting like gnarled fingers reaching down toward him. It was as if the forest was closing in on him, making him feel small and insignificant. Tom pushed through the brush, his flashlight flickering every now and then. He cursed under his breath and tapped it against his palm, willing it to stay on. He needed to see, needed answers. As he walked, he thought back to the strange woman in the woods. Her eyes had glowed in the dim light, and her presence had been so powerful that it almost felt like she had some sort of magic. It wasn't just her appearance, there was something else. Something primal about her. Something wild, the howl echoed. Through the woods again, this time much closer than before. It sent a chill down Tom's spine. He froze, his body tense, listening. The howl was long and mournful, like the cry of a wolf. But there was something about it that felt ... unnatural. He wasn't alone. Tom's heart raced, but he didn't turn back. Couldn't. Not now. He had to find out what was behind these strange happenings, and he was already too deep in the woods to turn back. The howls grew louder, closer, and it felt as though the forest itself was closing in on him. He pressed forward, following the sound of the howls. The trees grew thicker, and the darkness around him deepened. He felt the weight of the night pressing down on him. It was almost suffocating then. Suddenly, the howling stopped. The silence was deafening. Tom stopped in his tracks, straining his ears to hear any movement, any sign of what was out there.
Oh, the only sound was the wind, rustling the leaves high.
Above him, he stood there for a moment, waiting, before he took another step. The air felt different now. It wasn't just cold, it felt charged, like something was waiting to happen. As he moved forward, Tom noticed something odd. The trees ahead of him were arranged in a perfect circle. It was unnatural, like something had shaped the forest too. Form a boundary. He stepped closer, shining his flashlight into the center of the circle. There, in the center of the clearing, stood a large stone. It was covered in moss, ancient and weathered by time. But what struck Tom the most was the symbol. Carved into it. It was a simple circle with several jagged lines radiating outward, like the sun's rays. He stepped closer, his fingers reaching out to touch the stone. The moment his fingers made contact, a sudden rush of energy surged through his body, sending a jolt of fear through him. The air seemed to hum, as if the stone itself was alive. Tom quickly pulled his hand back, his heart pounding. What was this place? What had he stumbled upon? Before he could think further, he heard something moving in the trees behind him. Sound of footsteps, soft but deliberate. Tom spun around, his flashlight sweeping across the clearing, but he saw nothing. The footsteps stopped, and out of the corner of his eye, he caught a movement. It was her again. The woman from the woods. She stood just outside the circle, her figure almost blending into the shadows. Her eyes glowed in the darkness, watching him intently. There was no sign of fear in her gaze, just a calm certainty, as if she knew exactly what was going to happen next. Tom opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The woman stepped forward, her movements graceful, almost otherworldly. She stopped just outside the circle, standing silently in front of him. Her presence was powerful, yet there was a gentleness to her. Like a wild animal that could tear him apart in an instant but chose not to. "Who are you?" Tom asked, his voice trembling slightly. "What do you want?" The woman didn't answer right away. Instead, she raised her hand, palm open, and gestured toward the stone. Her gaze shifted from the symbol on the stone to Tom, and for the first time, he noticed something in her eyes. It was sadness, deep and ancient. "This land is not what it seems," she said, her voice soft but clear, carrying across the clearing. "It has a spirit, and that spirit has been awakened. The guardians of the forest are restless. They're not just protectors, they are prisoners bound to the land, and so are we." Tom's confusion only deepened. Guardians, prisoners, what does that mean? The woman took another step forward, closer to him now. "It means that the land calls to you. It has chosen you to see the truth. You must choose. Will you protect it, or will you leave it to fall into ruin?" Tom felt the weight of her words settle over him. The forest, the stone, the howls, the strange woman, they were all part of something much bigger than he had imagined. The question that had been burning in his mind now had an answer, but it raised even more questions. And as he stood there in the darkness, staring into the woman's glowing eyes, he knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Tom stood in the center of the forest clearing, staring at the mysterious woman before him. Her eyes, glowing softly in the moonlight, held an emotion he couldn't quite place. She wasn't threatening, but there was an undeniable power in her presence. She seemed at once part of the forest and separate from it, as if she had lived there for centuries, yet still remained beyond Tom's understanding. Her words echoed in his mind. The guardians of the forest are restless. They are not just protectors, they are prisoners, bound to the land, and so are we. He felt his heart pounding as he tried to process what she had said. Guardians, prisoners. The forest had a spirit. The land had chosen him. Tom had spent years in this cabin, trying to live a simple life, and now he was being told that the very land around him was alive, watching, waiting for something. "Why me?" Tom finally asked, his voice shaking slightly. The woman took a step closer, her movements so graceful it almost seemed like she was floating. "The land calls to you because it needs someone who understands it, someone who can see beyond what the eye shows. The Guardians have protected this land for centuries, but they are weakening. The bond between them and the land is breaking, and if nothing is done, everything will fall apart." Tom felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He had thought the strange events in the woods were just coincidences. He had believed the howls were nothing more than the calls of wolves or wild animals. But now, with the woman standing in front of him, he realized the truth. There was something far greater than him at play, something ancient, powerful, and dangerous. "I don't understand," Tom said, his mind racing. "What am I supposed to do? How can I help?" The woman smiled, though it was a sad smile. "The forest has chosen you, Tom. You are the one who can restore the balance, but you must be willing to make a choice. The Guardians will not stay forever. The land is dying, and you must decide whether to fight for it or walk away." Weight of her words, the land was dying? He had lived in these woods for so long, and everything had always seemed peaceful. The trees, the animals, the silence, it was all so ... normal. How could anything be dying? How could the forest, something so vast and ancient, be on the edge of destruction? "What do you mean the land is dying?" Tom asked, his voice low. "How can that even happen?" The woman's expression grew more serious. "The forest is tied to the land, and the Guardians are its protectors. But the balance has shifted. The spirits that once watched over it are weakening, and the land is becoming ... corrupted. The howls you hear are the cries of the Guardians, reaching out for help. They're trapped, bound by the same forces that are killing the forest. Only you can free them." Tom took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. This was all too much. He had never believed in things like spirits, magic, or guardians. But now, with the woman standing before him, he could feel the truth of her words in his bones. He didn't know how, but he knew she was right. Something was wrong, and the forest was asking for his help. The woman stepped closer again, her eyes locked on his. "There is one who has the power to stop it, Tom, but she will not reveal herself unless she trusts you. She is a shapeshifter, one of the last of her kind, and she will only appear when the time is right." "A shapeshifter?" Tom repeated, confused. "You mean someone can change forms? Like an animal?" The woman nodded. "Yes, the shapeshifters were once guardians themselves, able to take on the forms of the creatures they protected. But they are few in number now, and their power is fading. The one you need to find is the key to restoring the balance. But she will not help you unless you prove that you understand the forest, that you understand its pain." Tom looked down at his hands, feeling a sense of helplessness. He had no idea how to fix something so big. How could he possibly help the land? What could he do that would make a difference? The woman seemed to read his thoughts. "You have already taken the first step," she said softly, "by coming here. By seeking answers, you have shown that you are ready. But there is still much to learn. You must follow the signs, Tom. The forest will guide you." Tom nodded slowly, though he still wasn't sure what he was getting himself into. The woman stepped back, giving him space. "I cannot help you much further," she said. "But remember this, the shapeshifter is near. She will come to you when you are ready." With that, the woman turned and disappeared into the shadows of the trees, vanishing as silently as she had appeared. Tom stood in the clearing for a long time, staring at the spot where she had been. He felt a sense of finality, as if something important had just happened, but he didn't know what. What was he supposed to do next? How could he find this shapeshifter? And how could he help save the forest? The howls echoed once more, distant, but clear, reminding him that time was running out. Whatever was happening, it was growing stronger. He had no choice but to follow the path, to trust that the forest would guide him. With a deep breath, Tom turned and headed back toward the cabin. He had no answers yet, but he knew one thing for sure: he wasn't alone in this.
Yeah.
The forest was alive, and it was calling for his help. The following days felt like an endless blur for Tom. His mind was still spinning from the encounter with the woman in the woods and the strange truth she had shared with him. Guardians, shapeshifters, the forest dying, was all too much to take in at once. Yet, no matter how hard he tried to shake it off, the weight of it all remained heavy on his shoulders. He had spent days searching the forest for answers, following the signs as the woman had told him. He had noticed subtle changes in the trees, the ground, and even the animals. Some days the forest felt alive in ways it never had before. Quiet whispers on the wind, shifting shadows and fleeting glimpses of movement at the edge of his vision. But every time he thought he was close to understanding, the forest would fall silent, leaving him with more questions than answers. On the 5th day, after another long search, Tom sat by the edge of the clearing where he had first met the woman. He felt drained, as if the forest itself was pulling the life out of him. The trees stood like silent sentinels, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. The howl had been quieter in recent days, but Tom could still feel its presence, a distant echo that reminded him of the urgency of his task. He had almost given up when it happened. The wind shifted, and for a moment, everything became still. The birds stopped singing. The rustling of the leaves ceased. It was as if the entire forest was holding its breath. Then, without warning, the air around him seemed to vibrate with energy, and Tom saw her again. The woman stood just outside the clearing, her figure outlined by the soft glow of the moonlight. She wasn't alone this time. There, beside her, was a large wolf, a massive creature with gleaming fur, its eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Tom's heart raced as he took in the sight. The wolf didn't move, but there was something undeniably powerful about it, something ancient and primal. The woman stepped forward, and the wolf followed her, its gaze never leaving Tom. As she neared him, her eyes softened, and she spoke. "You've come far, Tom," she said, her voice calm and steady. "But there is still one final test." Tom swallowed hard. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. "What kind of test?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. The woman smiled faintly. "A test of trust. You must prove that you are willing to accept what the forest needs from you. The shapeshifter you seek is the key to saving this land, but she will not reveal herself to just anyone. She only comes to those who truly understand the bond between the forest and the guardians." Tom nodded slowly, his hands clenched into fists. He had come so far, and yet he still felt like he was missing something important. "What do I have to do?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The woman's gaze softened, and she motioned for him to follow her. "Come with me," she said. "The shapeshifter waits for you." Tom followed her through the woods, the wolf walking silently by their side. He had no idea where they were going, but he knew he had no choice but to trust the woman. The forest seemed to open up before them, the trees parting as they walked. The deeper they went, the more the air seemed to hum with energy, like the land itself was alive and aware of their presence. After what felt like hours, they arrived at a small clearing. In the center stood a stone altar, worn with age but still standing strong. The air was thick with the scent of earth and moss, and for the first time since he had come into the woods, Tom felt a sense of peace. The woman stopped in front of the altar and turned to Tom. "This is where the shapeshifter will appear. But only if you are truly ready." Tom looked around, but there was no sign of anyone else. "How do I know if I'm ready?" he asked. The woman didn't answer immediately. Instead, she placed a hand on the stone altar, and the wolf stood, still watching them. There was a long silence, and for a moment Tom felt like the world had stopped spinning. He felt small in the presence of the forest, like a mere speck in the vastness of the land. But as the silence stretched on, he realized something. The land wasn't trying to overwhelm him. It was waiting. It was waiting for him to understand. The woman spoke again, her voice soft but firm. "You must trust the forest, Tom. Trust the spirit that lives here. Only then will the shapeshifter come." Tom closed his eyes and took a deep breath. The forest was alive. He could feel it now, not just in the rustling leaves or the calls of the animals, but in his very bones. The land had chosen him, not because he was special, but because he was willing to listen. He had to trust it. He had to trust the power of the forest, even if he didn't fully understand it. He nodded, more to himself than to the woman. "Ready." As soon as the words left his lips, the air around him shifted. The wind picked up, swirling through the trees and lifting the leaves off the ground. A soft, eerie glow began to form in the center of the clearing, and Tom's heart skipped a beat as he watched. The glow grew brighter, and the shape of a figure began to materialize. The wolf growled softly, but there was no fear in its voice. It was as if it too knew what was happening. Tom's breath caught in his throat as the glow faded. And standing before him was the shapeshifter woman, but not like any woman he had ever seen before. Her hair was long and silver, flowing, like the moonlight itself. Her eyes glowed faintly, the same color as the forest spirit. She was beautiful, yes, but there was something fierce and untamed about her. Something that spoke of ancient power. The shapeshifter stepped forward, her gaze meeting Tom's. "You've come," she said, her voice smooth and melodic, yet filled with strength, "and now you must help restore the balance." Tom nodded, his heart racing. He had done it. He had found her. But the real test was just beginning.